Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing Quest. My name is Brenden Pugh, and today we have Chase Amyot with us, and he has a uh, graphic novel that he has written, Dino Dames Comics, and so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his process and have a great conversation. So, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Glad to be here and chat about comics. It's always a fun activity for me.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started, where the idea for all of it came from, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in sort of creative work and design, working for all sorts of companies for 20 odd years. I've always done my own creative writing, and over the last 2 years, I decided to sit down and actually create this story called Dino Dames. And really where the inspiration comes from, I suppose there's lots of influences, whether it's my love for dinosaurs or animation. Each of my characters even have a little bit influence where they come from, like the Viking girl is very much influenced from the Viking series. And of course, Trash, another character of mine, which I love, she actually is an influence from the animation Arcane. So I think, I definitely collect inspiration from many sources. And being in the creative industry, I've just been fortunate enough to gather a huge surplus of references and influences. And, my friends and family would call it useless information, but I suppose I find a way to channel it correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that taking in all the things you learn and everything and finally putting it into something.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been a Marvel fan and a DC fan since I was a young kid. So all of that sort of like adds to it.
Yeah. So where did the exact kind of origin for this story begin? Like when were you like, hey, this is kind of an idea and starting to write it and like kind of take us through that process?
Um, well, I think the story itself sort of evolved actually from that animation Primal. And I was just like, yo, it's just so great how these guys have taken a cool concept like dinosaurs and mixed it with people and that. And slowly but surely, this idea evolved in my head. And looking at like very strong female characters, I've always enjoyed like the artwork and the design when it came to drawing female heroines versus male superheroes.
Mhm.
So these were all like, I think, basic kickstarters for pushing me in the right direction. And eventually, I think sitting down with my comic artist, my drawer, and my editor, we eventually just came up with this concept called Dino Dames, and we just rolled with it. And what's really great about this whole world that we've developed, we decided not to try and constrain ourselves too much to rules. So, Peter Pan, how you have the flying pirate ship, Captain Hook. We've got flying pirate ships.
Mhm.
We've got like that steampunk element to it. We've tried to as well look at many cultures around the world, whether it's tribals and culture in Africa or Viking culture. We try to bring all of that into our world and just say, it's like not really constrain ourselves. And as well, we've got things like orcs and goblins and the fantasy world. We try to keep as wide and open to options as possible.
Yeah, just kind of throw it all in there and let it all exist. I think stories like that are really fun because there's so many things that I personally like, and then it's like, oh, they can just all exist together. Like that's great, you know?
Yeah, you just let some rules be a little bit loose, and you can have a lot of fun when it comes to creative writing. So
Yeah.
I enjoy it.
So you
I,
wrote it, and then you have a artist. Um,
yes, yeah.
is that someone you've known for a long time? Did you find them outside of this project and brought them in? Like, how did you go about finding
Um,
an artist?
well, as being a creative director for a few companies over the years, and I met my artist through actually freelance means, and he's actually in South America.
Hmm.
And we did a lot of art put together, and slowly but surely he did some of my personal artwork. And he, as well as actually won an award for doing comics and that. They did a comic for Riot Games. I don't know if you know them,
Hmm.
but they're quite popular. So somehow we kind of ended up on this whole journey together where we actually took this whole story and started really developing this comic idea. But he's actually based in South America, and his older brother, funny enough, is an editor. So it was just sort of like, well, here's a close little connected family. I don't have to outsource with too many people. And we became a pretty close team after that. We've been working together probably for about 3.5 years now.
Hmm. Yeah, it's amazing how, we were just talking before the show that you're down in South Africa and I'm in Iowa and the States, and you're artists in South America. I mean, it's just amazing that people can just work from all across the world and create something like this. It's pretty cool.
I must admit, my hours are a bit like, up and down and radical, but, that's just sort of part of the territory. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night to have a meeting or a conversation, but,
Yeah.
I really enjoy the work, so it's a very small sacrifice.
Yeah, for
It's like,
sure.
it doesn't bother me at all. Yeah.
Did you, so you've self-published this, and um
Yes.
I'm looking at the website. The artwork, of course, looks great. You've sent me a copy. I have not read it yet, unfortunately, but I it's in my list of ones to read. So do you have like a bunch of things planned out, sequels? Why? Like, obviously, it's a comic, so there's probably more to it eventually.
Yeah, what I should do is actually send you a map that we've actually created. So, we've actually taken the step of saying, well, we're going to send our characters on this journey where we say, oh, you have to cross the Pearl Ocean and all that. We feel like this world needs to be a little bit more fleshed out. So we've actually got a map, which I'll send to you sometime. When you sit down and read, maybe you just look at the map for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
It will help you visualize where you're sort of going with these characters. But this story itself, we imagine it'll be about 15 to 16 comics, which will be about 4 books, or 4 graphic novels, should I say.
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully by the time we get to the end of it, and we've actually gathered ourselves loyal readers, we hope to visit some of these other locations around our world, but we'll develop completely new characters, new Dino Dames, or new heroes,
Mm-hmm.
new heroines, or whatever we choose to take it. So in this way, we felt like, everyone lives in this world, but not all the characters are connected in that. Everyone's, you live a story with these characters, and then it's done and it's over, and you move on to something completely new and different. So it keeps, I think, it's a completely, I think, fresh style of writing, and we decided maybe not to connect the characters, but who knows, if someone says, hey, I really love that character, I want to see them again, maybe something like that, and they pop up again somewhere along the line. But we've really developed a big world, and we want to play with it as much as possible.
Yeah. And it gives you a lot of freedom too, I think, to do that, and freedom to, because there's so much, especially with how like Marvel and DC have set the stage for everything. It's like Captain America always has to cross over with Iron Man at some point. It's like, but if you can, I think that does give you a lot of freedom to this is a story and it's over here and it's now that's done. And now you can create a whole new set of stories. And I think that gives you about limitless possibilities, probably.
Yeah, well, that was my hopes as well. You know, like when the character stays alive or dead, it's sort of that bittersweet ending. You kind of have to get to it to really value a character, and be able to progress and actually enjoy a new story, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
The character sticks around for too long, they get a little stale, they'll get a little old. Everyone knows what they're going to do. Predictable writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it gives we've live in a world that's kind of obsessed with like sequels and keeping things going, and it's like, it's okay if something just exists, like this is it, and then that's it. I find that
I mean,
fascinating.
yeah, no, I think that is probably definitely the journey will eventually keep going, but hopefully we'll get through these first 16 comics, and we'll have that loyal followers that want to keep reading with us or as we keep creating.
Yeah, for sure. For your writing process, how did you go about I so I'm pretty interested because me and a buddy of mine have started dabbling a little with the comic side. I normally write prose and novel stuff. But we have an idea for a comic book set in the world that I've created. And so we're kind of dabbling in that. I've never written a comic book before, so I'm kind of figuring that out. So, how does that process really look for you? Had you written comics before, or were you kind of figuring it out as you went?
I've done a lot of creative writing for whether it's for back in the day of college and all of that. It was sort of a favorite subject for me, and it actually evolved a little bit into the corporate work I did. I did a design for a website or built a website, and usually there's a lot of writing that comes with introductions, and so I find myself doing that type of stuff a lot. But creative writing's always sort of been like a niche of mine. I've actually enjoyed it, and I've also done my fair share of reading comics and odd books, fantasy a lot, and sci-fi. But when it comes to my writing process, I live with a character in my head probably for a month or two before I actually sit down and find the guts to actually put a little bit on paper. But besides, eventually getting some sticky notes down in front of me, as soon as I actually kind of start rolling, I'm very fortunate enough that I can actually probably bash out a comic in about an evening or so.
Mm-hmm.
But like I say, I spend a month or two before I actually sit down and do that. But a comic itself is only about, I imagine, 3 to 4 pages. And I'm very fortunate to work with a very good editor. So he's able to not only, I suppose, fix and correct some little scenes that work better with the artwork that needs to be developed, but he can as well step in and say, it would actually be really great if you introduced these scenes here. So
Mm-hmm.
he's definitely been a great influence and help when it comes to adding that little bit of extra icing on the cake.
Mm-hmm. And so for those listening, maybe let's break down to exactly what you mean by comic book. There's graphic novels. There's what's the difference in like page lengths for those types of works?
Well, the way I've always experienced graphic novels, and then when it came to Marvel and such, is it's actually compiled of multiple comics. Usually, like say, one of my favorite series that is Marvel Age of Apocalypse. That's built up of 4 graphic novels, which is, I think, overall close to like 24, plus comics amongst all of those. So that's really what we're doing, is we're saying, well, our series is 15, 16 comics, and we're going to take every 4 comics and basically make a graphic novel.
Mm-hmm.
Which Anderson really kind of calls it a book, but in my language and your language, it's a graphic novel.
Yeah. That Age of Apocalypse, actually, back when I was much more heavily into going to my comic book store and actually buying comics and stuff, I was about that time, and that was a really great run of stories. I don't remember much of it, but I remember reading it thinking, man, this is a really great run.
Yeah, no, it was sort of like back then. That was like Marvel really stepping into the like dark side of things. People were like, "Whoa, Marvel! How can you write something like this?" So
Mm-hmm.
I think us wild fans were like, "Yeah, it's about time. This
Yeah.
is what we've been waiting for."
Yeah. Yeah, that was about the time I think they were also the Thor comic that had Gore the God Butcher in it.
Mhm.
And that was a really great run too. And then when I saw the movie, I was like, this is not as good as the comic book was at all.
I mean, I've never been a Thor reader, but somehow I found myself reading that one. It's like, damn, these are great characters, especially Gore.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a completely different side of Thor. So yes, that was a fantastic one.
Yeah. Yeah. So back to Dino Dames. Did you so you're writing 16 books or 16 individual comics to then compile. Are you
Yes.
Do you have that all outlined? Are you kind of outlined a little bit and you're kind of moving through it? Are you just kind of writing it as you go? Like what's kind of your, how much have you planned, I guess?
Well, I've actually written out, I suppose, the outline of every chapter that still needs to come.
Mm-hmm.
I am 2 comics ahead, so right now we've actually released 4. We're halfway finishing number 5 right now, and the next 6 and 7 are written.
Mm-hmm.
But as for the remaining ones, they have been sort of like, outlined the basic concept and where the characters go and stuff. And I've given that to my editor just in case I ever get hit by a bus or something. So
Yeah.
that's always covered, yeah. I would definitely hate, there's nothing worse if something happens to a writer and there isn't some sort of material that, someone else can pick up and continue. I think, a lot of people fear for the Game of Thrones writer R. R. Martin.
Yeah.
Please have material laid down for your editors to continue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was, with Robert Jordan with Wheel of Time, he passed before he finished it. But he
Yes.
left such extensive notes that Brandon Sanderson was able to pick it up and actually finish it, because he had enough stuff. So, yeah,
Yeah, I think
I always wonder
now,
about George Martin about like, is he gonna get it finished? Like, I don't know.
yeah, no, he's a guy that's a slow runner and he enjoys life. So
Hmm.
we can only hope that he gets it.
Yeah, for sure. So, you said you did a lot of writing. Have you done any novel writing? Is there a difference? Like, how do you? I mean, obviously there's a difference, but what creatively do you think about it differently if you were to write something else that wasn't a comic book, or is it still kind of the same thought process?
um, well, I suppose I've really just done a lot of like creative writing, which is really just short stories.
Hmm.
And I've got like a whole folder full of them. And really, my hopes is I can actually, get to the revenue part and actually develop more comics that have nothing to do with Dino Dames
Hmm.
and just other stories. I've even actually done submissions of some for competitions and that. And unfortunately, I haven't quite got around to finding the time or the funding for it because a lot of my energy's in Dino Dames. And
Hmm.
if this can work out, then I'll definitely like roll up with my other stories. But most of my, I suppose, paid writing was specifically in the corporate space, writing about a business's about us or their values as a company,
Hmm.
the soul type of writing. But otherwise, when it comes to getting paid as a writer, that's something that I'm hoping to achieve in the next couple of years or so
Yeah.
as we keep evolving comics.
Yeah. And did you so with deciding to kind of self-publish all this, I don't know if there's really a traditional route, I guess, for like with
Not at
novels,
all.
there's a traditional route. You can either try to get traditionally published or you can self-publish. Comics, though, it's kind of like you just kind of
A
start your
bit.
own thing and go for it.
Yeah, no, actually, it's a real wild, wild west. And I think a lot of comic writers have been, in the struggle for years, years and years and years. So even the guys at the top of the food chain, they'll still say it's a tough, industry.
Hmm.
But I've definitely, been trying. Besides, the obvious like places like the Amazon, and I've actually just recently found a print publisher here within my country, South Africa, and I'll reach out to the UK and America and slowly try and find those connections as I grow. But one of the ones is I've actually looked at blockchain and Web3. When it comes to NFT ownership and being able to sell and trade comics online, just like NFTs,
Hmm.
and it's a company called D-Reader, but it's a completely new stepping stone in the industry. And if anything, I've actually found more progress building up a community online and stuff with them because of the whole Web3 environment. Everyone lives online in the Discord channel, and while I'm creating, it allows me to share sketches and drawings and that before the artwork even gets developed to the comic. So it allows you to actually build up a community around your story and your work before you even try to get to the publishing stage. With publishing, it's a lot of, oh, thank you, I'm glad you like my work, and we can get the book published and put on a bookshelf. But is anyone going to pick it out of the thousands of books or whatever is in front of them? So this way, it's sort of I'm actually allowed to communicate with my interested readers and the people that like my work, and actually get to the point of saying, "Hey, let's read this and evolve this story together."
Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of the whole point of why I started this YouTube channel too was I started it with my brother originally and it was one thing and we've kind of it's morphed and now it's just me doing it. But it's called Writing Quest because I haven't published anything. It's on the quest of me doing it. And I thought this very similar thing of like, man, if I could just kind of build an audience while I'm doing this, we live in such a crazy time where anyone can have access to building an audience and doing something. And so
Not completely.
very similar. Just like, hey, maybe if I work on building an audience while also writing things, when I get to the end, there's maybe an actual group of people who care about what I'm doing.
No, completely. I think that's with the whole social media, even TikTok and that. Not that I know much of TikTok use, but this is all new media and industry that allows you to actually grow yourself. Um, so that's definitely something I've been trying to move towards more than just trying to stay in the studio and keep creating. You've actually got to step out of the studio and be a bit of a social person and actually connect with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, and it depends too on I mean, there's a lot of people like who do YouTube, for instance, is a best example. Um, that they're doing things for shock value, or they're just trying to like do whatever. But
Oh,
I think there's a great, you only really there's a saying or something about this where it's like you only really need like 1,000 true fans, like real people that actually care about it. And that's so much more attainable now for people than it's ever been. And it's just a really cool time to be a creative for sure.
yeah, I mean, if anything, you've always got to as well keep up with all the tech and that's coming with it, all the different communication medias and that.
Hmm.
But so it's like I say, you can't just spend too much time in the front of the drawing pad. You've actually got to step out your comfort zone a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. The technology, like the D reader, like I've not heard of that, which is not surprising because there's so much technology coming out all the time for.
Oh, they're very as well. So yeah, no, I wouldn't worry about that. But yeah, if you've got time, definitely click through. What's really great about them is they've got some fantastic indie creators,
Mhm.
and these are all stories that are being sold and read by, I suppose you call them Web3 community members, people that purchase, sell, and trade on the Solana blockchain.
Mhm.
And it's a completely new industry, So now you can actually buy, let's say there's only 1,000 comics of this particular one that goes out. You buy, whether it's one or five of them. And now you actually have the power to not only whether you keep them or actually sell them on the open market, the NFT market. So it's a completely new ecosystem, but I think it has a lot of legs to grow. And
Mhm.
I think as well, people. It's one thing just to own a digital comic. It's another thing to own something that actually has some uniqueness to it, sort of like a limited edition
Mhm.
version of that comic. It comes with artwork that's done by a unique artwork, a unique artist
Mhm.
for the cover artwork that is.
Yeah.
So these are all things that they're exploring and trying to do, and as all within their technology that actually allow us creators to add a digital signature to an art, sorry, a comic and all that. So again, trying to build up the community, using the right tech to try and do it. It's all new and it's actually quite a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and figuring out how to make it feel special, and I think that's what's cool about the NFT stuff. I'm not super tech savvy on that side of things, but it's one thing to just send a PDF and here's the thing, but then if you can actually create with the NFT technology something it's got a special piece of art, or it's got a special signature, it's got something in it that makes it very unique, is it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, and I think that's where they're trying to take this sort of digital tech and all that. And of course, what's really great is they catering for regular web users. So you can always just come with your credit card and just buy and build up your portfolio or your profile with all these different indie creator comics.
Hmm. Yeah, and so that's it with the indie scene. I feel like it's really blown up right now. Indie comics. There's
Oh
a
yeah, no, for sure.
there's a lot going on. Have you heard of the Ripaverse? I don't know if you've seen them around. Um,
No, I have no.
they're here in
Is it?
America, but they like raised $3 million or something for this one comic they made, and then like it's just popping up. All of a sudden I'm seeing all these comics, and then you sent me an email with Dino Dames, and I'm like, there's just comics everywhere. Like it's crazy. So it's really cool.
Yeah, it's like there's some big brands as well in the NFT space, and now suddenly diving into comics and storytelling. I think you know what it is. It's a whole new media that I think people have gained more interest in.
Hmm.
They actually want to be told a story about whether it's a product or a character. They don't just want it to be sort of face value. They want something that's a little bit deeper,
Hmm.
so they actually have a connection with what they're actually buying or getting into.
Yeah.
And that that comes big from gaming as well.
Yeah.
We live very much in a gaming generation now, I think.
Yes. Yeah. I just read a statistic about gaming that was like the gaming industry monetarily like dwarfs Hollywood by like
Sure.
billions of dollars, and I was like, that's insane to me that it's so like massive.
I mean, I've played my fair share of games as well growing up, and I at least think some of the best stories I've experienced have come from games. Sort of
Hmm.
those games you play for 4 or 5 hours and you get to the end and you're done. Those type of games have always been a huge influence. Even in my writing, I still have certain characters that live at the back of my head
Hmm.
that I'll never be able to try to forget.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great time for I think it used to be very much like people thought of books as maybe like books and film as maybe the highest form of storytelling, and
Hmm.
comics and games and stuff were kind of like, yeah, that's it's okay, but it's kind of for kids and we won't really. But I think we're hitting a time now where like a- any kind of storytelling medium is viable and people really see the value in the differences with them.
No, I mean, I think at one point I don't even own a PlayStation, but I went and found a friend that had one, and I bought a PlayStation game just so I could experience the stories. So
Hmm.
um, I definitely have a love not just for gaming but good storytelling,
Yeah.
and huge amount of influence comes from the gaming industry.
Yeah. I did something similar. My younger brother is a big gamer. He's got all the stuff and he loves them, and that's like his main activity. And he recently I've never really been much of a gamer. I appreciate it, but I've just not it's just not been a huge thing for me. Other than, like early Nintendo, Super Mario, Pokemon, like, I grew up on that stuff.
Honestly,
Yeah, but the Xbox PlayStation thing, I kind of missed that. Um, but anyways, he's a big gamer, and when he recently upgraded his Xbox, I was like, "Hey, can I? I don't want to put a lot of money into it, but I'd love to just play a little bit. You know, Mostly just for the story. Like, I don't care about being super good at the game. I don't really care about any of that, but I've heard about all these games that have great stories, so I ended up buying that off of him and uh got some games and stuff, and it's like it's like I don't want to put a bunch of money or time into it, but I do want to experience some of those cool stories, you know.
some of my favorite content creators are actually guys that sort of just play a game, so I can sit back and just sort of watch the story.
Mhm.
And of course, for guys that review comics, and I don't have to go and buy every single comic. Actually, I can listen to some guy review some of my favorite X-Men or DC characters. So these content creators, they're definitely adding value, and they're finding I mean, they get a huge amount of fans that watch their shows. So
Mhm.
the audience is definitely there.
Yeah, for sure. Um so I guess you're talking about writing comics is pretty quick. You're just talking about, you kind of can get out a draft of for a book in an evening or so. Um
Yeah.
Is there really you have an editor, is there really a lot of editing, or is it kind of like you write it and then the editor maybe makes a couple of tweaks? Like, you don't go back and kind of do like a whole new edit on it, right?
Funny enough, actually, there's quite a bit of editing that goes up and down
Mhm.
because whether he adds and suggests little scenes, and I kind of go back with them, and we kind of have sometimes there's back and forth. But the writing can actually even keep evolving even to the point where the artwork's in front of me and I'm actually saying, no, actually change a word or two, whatever it might be. But the editor process has definitely been a huge value. I have learned actually how valuable it is over the years. Starting off as a writer was something that never really occurred to me. But having someone to bounce off ideas with and actually criticize what you kind of put in on paper a little bit is hugely valuable before you actually try and get it to the end reader. Because at the end of the day, you just want to make sure that the readers experience not only great artwork but the best story possible.
Yeah, that's really cool that you can you can, even if you have the artwork done, you can change all the wording, and you're like, they need to maybe say this a little different, or we need maybe a box here to say a certain thing. Yeah, that's cool.
As, sometimes the artist is like, oh, bugger, I have to rearrange the character a little bit to kind of get the bubble to work nicely, but that doesn't happen too often. Usually my editor and I, we're pretty good and we work well together. And as well, because he's the older brother of the artist, it's there's no miscommunication whatsoever, really.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you so from the writing and the artwork, do you kind of write that first draft? Like when does the artist start on stuff? Do you write a draft, edit it, or do you write the draft and let him get started? When at what point in that process does he start actually writing or drawing out the art?
Usually, once my editor and I have got at least 95% of the story right, we hand it to our artist. Between the two of them, they actually sit down and kind of even look at the scenes and how what's been written could actually work with the character's movement or where the character needs to be, and of course, always writing out or describing a fight scene's always interesting between the writer and the artist. But it's definitely a sort of a work in progress. But I think all in all, because my artist and I and my editor, we've all grown up on the same animations, whether it was like the Naruto or the Cowboy Bebop or all this type of old school storytelling, gaming, other comics, like as we keep mentioning Marvel and that. We seem to come from the same background of almost like comic nerds and game nerds and so forth. So very fortunate enough that even though he lives in South America and I live in South Africa, we seem to talk the same language when it comes to this sort of comic storytelling.
Yeah, that's cool. Go ahead.
Oh, no, so I sometimes even just mention a character like, I want this character's face to look like Luffy D. Luffy from, I forget the animation's name now, but anyway. Point is that it actually allows us to have good little references and my artist knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. The one that I'm working on with my buddy that we've just barely started. I've got a bit of a script. We're kind of working on some character designs, just fleshing things out a little bit. But we're kind of gonna try going the route a little bit of we're shooting for more of a graphic novel length as opposed to individual little. I've broken it up into about 5 parts, but basically we're gonna kind of do I'm going to write it out and then he's going to do just very rough sketches, like almost like doodling, just kind of like as that first draft of, does this start to lay out okay? Is this working how we want? But nothing that's too permanent to where it's, feel like we've put a lot of work into a bunch of art and then we get rid of it or something.
Yeah, my artist is very good at just drawing very fast sketches. So, he can draw out 3-4 panels in 3-4 minutes or whatever it is. But they're very quick, very simple. In that way, we're able to go through a lot of ideas with very little effort. And as well, what we did is we've taken quite a different approach in the way we do our design and end product. Is Webtoons is actually like scroll comics. Just main one comic panel. And as you scroll with your mouse digitally or with your finger on your mobile, you just go down to the next panel and keep moving down. So we actually have started designing our characters or our story in that format. And once we have that format done, we then take that artwork and then we put it into the traditional panel format that's usually used for print media and that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit of a different approach, I suppose, maybe some artists or comic creators would take. But we actually start off in the digital webtoons, web scroll format, and then we actually move that artwork across into the traditional page format.
Mm-hmm. And then do you, so when you publish it finally, you have the print version, is the digital version still in that format, or do you change it over to like more of a normal?
Well, Amazon's a place that requires that the digital format, the Kindle format, is done as you would usually see the comic in a bookstore or comic store.
Mm-hmm.
But a place like D-Reader or media, even like Webtoons, is very popular. These are all places that support scrollable comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, we live on our mobile devices, whether you traveling to work or, just sitting down in front of your computer, everything's sort of much more simpler with the movement of your finger or just with the scroll of your mouse.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people would say they'd much prefer the old traditional way. And trust me, I as well come from that background. But I found myself more and more being a reader that finds being in the digital space that I actually prefer this format. It's allows me to actually enjoy the artwork more. I don't have to panel across to different panels. It just allows me to scroll, and it's almost like watching a movie reel.
Yeah. I like reading comics. I love reading comics on like an iPad or something. I think that it's really you can have the brightness up, you can really see the colors, like all that kind of stuff. But then when I go to like read a novel, I'd rather read a paper novel. So it's you have all these different mediums, but I like that idea of kind of being able to just scroll through it's almost like a sorry, my dog's barking at me. It's almost like a like a film strip. Like you're just kind of watching through the film strip. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's it's definitely, I think, popular on Webtoons. If you ever visit that site, you'd be surprised how many indie creators use that media.
I'll write that down. Webtoons.
Yeah, and that's very. Webtoons has, I think, I would say thousands of creators, and you can definitely get lost if you enjoy reading completely random, wild, different stories.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's the one thing with comic books is you can really get into some wacky stuff because you can do whatever you want with it. There's really no limit.
I mean, that's something about, like I say, working in the D-Reader space that I mentioned, and being with so many other different indie creators. It's pretty wild, like the imaginations that get shared and the stories that are getting put down on paper and that. So sometimes it's almost daunting. It's like, sure, I've really got to be on my game here to make sure my creativity is really adding some fun and some smiles to everyone's day.
Yeah, for sure. That's really cool. Yeah, I hope that I've always loved comic books. That's been something similar to you. I grew up watching stuff, and so it's really fun to see it really just getting a lot of attention, and a lot of people are creating stuff, and it's really fun. So
yeah, it definitely is push the competition up.
Yeah, definitely. Because now there's so many people that are doing it that you got to really step it up. And based on what I've seen of your guys' stuff, your artwork is incredible. So compliments to
thank you.
your artist for sure. So where do you see if I can formulate my question right? So you said you have 4 comic books out. You're going to 16. Do you have like the future stuff planned out? Like, do you have ideas already for your next group of 16 comics, or where you might take the story next?
Yeah, my editor and I, we've like kind of said, oh, wouldn't it be great if we developed a character like this over here, and they have this type of dinosaur, and this is sort of their background. But I keep kind of going, I'm having a lot of fun here, but we've got to kind of slow down and hold the brakes a little bit because it's a lot of pie in the sky type of talk. And, it's you don't want to put too much hopes in that or too much energy because there's a lot of, I suppose, stuff that's happening now, like real stuff, being currently the 16 comics that I mentioned. So completely, I've got some fantastic characters sort of written on paper with my editor, and we'd love to start fleshing that out. But right now, we're just very goal driven to make sure that we deliver on a great story and a complete story. And from there, we can actually let our readers and even our audience actually say, cool, what's next? And we can present some ideas and let our readers actually say, no, we want to hear a story about these characters that's sitting in that corner of the map. So I think that's also great. It's us creators, we don't have to assume everything. We can put a little bit of feedback to our audience and actually take that into account.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think actually a lot of creators aren't always the best at that. I think taking in, I think actually that's a big thing of what happens with a lot of the bigger studios now is they're not listening to their audience as much. And I think taking in some of that feedback, you obviously you can't take all of it. You can't just do everything that your audience says, but you should definitely be listening for ideas at least.
No, and you'd be surprised how a loyal reader could suddenly give a simple idea and it completely lets off a firework of creative sparks, if you will.
Yeah. That I think that's also the hardest part. You were saying about you have all these ideas and you got to bring back your focus. I think that's the hardest part about anything creative is like the moment you start on one part, all of a sudden you have all these different branches and it's like, no, bring it back.
Completely, yeah.
Yeah.
And even our world map, we're like, oh no, we want to go up here sometime. So yeah, I completely got to keep on just making sure that we stay on track.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I just have I just take a bunch of notes and I keep it all like, well, maybe someday I'll get to this, but I gotta focus on what I'm doing right now. So that's really cool.
That's the best you can do as a writer and as a creator is just keep holding on to those characters somewhere, keep them safe, and hope you can get to them sometime soon.
Yeah. So when does so you're working on number 5? When's the timeline for that? Are you feeling like you get it out soon, or is it a ways away? How's that kind of?
We're probably about maybe 2 months at max, to finishing it. I like to be optimistic and probably say 5-6 weeks. But because I suppose we're not in a huge rush and no one's demanding delivery of it right now, I'm giving my artists a little bit of space because over the last 6-8 months or so, I've just had late nights delivering on these first 4 comics. We've done comic covers, different variants. We've done, as I mentioned, the webtoons version, the scroll version, and the traditional print version. When actually compiling these first 4 into a graphic novel, we need a cover for that book, for that graphic novel. So my artist, even though he's had 4 stories to write, I've always been giving him something more to complete.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, and you got to balance that too of taking breaks and because you want to stay fresh, but you also want to keep pushing it forward. It's that balance.
Yeah, I think my artist appreciates when you can sit down in his beanbag and just read a manga or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Very cool. Well, we'll kind of start maybe bringing this to a close. It's been great to talk to you. Where can we find stuff? Where can we find you? Give us all that kind of information.
Well, we've got our website, so it's www.dino-dames.com. And on that site, you can actually find it's like a Twitter link at the bottom, which takes you direct to my profile if you want to chat directly to me. Otherwise, there's lots of Discord buttons, which actually takes you straight into the Discord channel of D-Reader. I'm very active in chatting in that community. And if you just had to say my creator name, which is Grim Xavier, or you had to even just type in Dino Dames or something like that, I always just hook up with you, and we can always chat in direct message or something like that. But I'm pretty much online all the time. I'm pretty easy to find. So as long as you can find our website, the rest should be pretty easy.
Yeah, and it looks like you got links to on the website. They take you to Amazon and stuff, or you can do digital or print or
Yeah, we've got all of that, and we're going to keep on adding to that. So there'll be I'm sure you'll see more different options of different medias and that as we go. We actually even have a YouTube channel where we've started stepping in and exploring, I suppose, our characters in an animated form. And really, it's just like a music video, or sorry, I said like a music track, and our characters just repeating a 20-second animation. But this is really us just saying like, hey, we would love to actually take our characters into a live media and actually maybe make some sort of animation one day. So hopefully the comic will actually fund that venture, the next 2 to 3 years or whatever it might be.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. Yeah, I just saw someone was talking about the future of YouTube and the future of media creation, and they were kind of whatever I was watching, they were talking about people are going to start putting out like full movies and full animated shows just on YouTube, just on their YouTube channels. I'm like, that's yeah, it's super cool.
No, AI is incredible right now. I hope that I can maybe just feed a comic page to an AI program and it spits out an animation for me. I mean, that would be the dream.
Yeah, that would be incredible. And the AI conversation is huge, and maybe we can do that for our next one. But it definitely, I think there's the right and wrong ways to use it, but it definitely brings some things to be more accessible to more people. Because getting an animation done is a costly venture, and so getting access to an AI that you can give it that comic book page and it gives you an animated version, that'd be crazy.
Yeah, I think that would be a lot of us would really enjoy that playtime with our creations and actually be able to make it come to life. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hey, thanks for talking to me. This has been really fun, and thanks everyone for watching. This has been Writing Quest, and we'll link all that stuff up below in the bottom for people to click on and find your stuff. So it's been great to talk to you.
Yeah, cool. Take it easy, everyone. Thanks again. I really appreciate your time.